about Stanley KRIPPNER, whom I have known for almost 25 years now. I got to work closely with him at Saybrook University, where he is a professor. He is an internationally known scholar and scientist. He is the author of over 31 books and 1,000 articles. And he has a book, so this would be number 32, that is coming out here in Russian. It has the English title of Dreams, A Different Reality. He is a world-renowned expert in so many topics, but I'll mention just a few. Shamanism, dreams, hypnosis, sexuality, and spirituality. I want to mention one area of work of his where I think he demonstrated a type of courage that is not that common in academia. He became one of the very first people to talk publicly about the rape and massacre of women in Juarez, Mexico, while he was also giving programs on human sexuality in Mexico, and thereby truly risking his life in order to make this awful situation in Mexico known. And I'm sure by now you have heard about this situation, but Stanley KRIPPNER was one of the first people to talk publicly about this. He has really been a personal mentor and model for me. While at Saybrook, I would see him interact with the president of the American Psychological Association, and then be talking to Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead, a very famous rock and roll group, and then he would be interacting with Rolling Thunder, a Native American healer, and he has been able to, I think, work across many both international boundaries and academic boundaries in a way that I think is perhaps unique in the world. He wanted me to mention that this is the 40th anniversary of his coming to Russia. He was in Moscow 40 years ago, before Glasnost, and that was also a personally risky thing for him to do, but he has really been a person who has been weaving together peoples from all over the world. So with that said, let me turn the talk over to Dr. Stanley KRIPPNER.
Thank you, David, for such a glowing introduction. And I think that I should just sit down. I cannot possibly live up to the description. But he was talking about my personal courage in publicizing the violence in Juarez, Mexico. However, what I did was nothing in comparison to my friend Adrian Hernandez from Juarez, Mexico, who continues to go to work every day, even though he could be shot, he could be kidnapped on his way to work or on his way back to work. Juarez is a very, very violent city. And I think that one of the contributions of transpersonal psychology must be to find antidotes to violence and human cruelty. As all of the Russians know, this week is the 69th anniversary of Nazi Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union. A war called the Great Patriotic War that killed 20 million citizens and soldiers of the Soviet Union, most of them Russian.
Hole number 5. Richard Thomas.
So,
and Cosmos into 20,000.
I'm going to talk about transpersonal experiences that have changed history. And of course, this is the theme of our conference this week.
Hole number 8.
And some of these experiences
Transpersonal
have been in the service of bringing more peace, humanity, and compassion to the world. Now, there is an English language book called Farther Shores, and the author is Yvonne Cason. And in that book, she introduced the term spiritually transformative experiences. Experiences that transform the life of a person or a group. So I'm going to borrow her term, but I'm going to use the word transpersonally transformative experiences because transpersonal is broader than spiritual. You remember Harris Friedman's discussion in his opening remarks that transpersonal as a term embraces both religiosity and spirituality. So, some of the experiences I talk about will be more religious, some will be more spiritual. So, I am going to use the term transformative transpersonal experiences that have been historically important in a number of fields of human endeavor. And you might be surprised at what some of them have been. Of course, in the life of the Buddha, there were many TTEs, which I will use as the abbreviation, and our translator can use the abbreviation in Russian. Buddha was born about 566 before Common Era. And as most of you know, on his first 3 trips outside the palace, he saw sickness, old age, and death, asking himself, how can I enjoy a life of pleasure when there is so much suffering in the world? On his 4th trip, he met a wandering monk who had given up everything, but resolved to be like him. So for 6 years, the Buddha practiced extreme asceticism, depriving himself of everything, of food, of sex, of human companionship, of pleasure. It didn't work. So remember that if you're tempted to a life of asceticism, it doesn't have a very good track record. But then he started to eat nourishing food. He regained his strength. He resolved to sit under a Bodhi tree until he found an answer to his question. Following temptations and conflict, he attained enlightenment, understanding the cause of suffering and how to resolve it. So for the next 45 years, he taught the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, the Eightfold Path of the 5 precepts, and his TTE continues to transform the world and its inhabitants. Now, in Jewish and Christian tradition, there are many TTEs. The book of Genesis talks about Jacob in his dreams beholding a ladder set up on earth, and the top of it reached into the heavens. And again, this is very typical Western spiritual imagery, the ladder, the ascent. But it's also shamanic imagery, the magical flight, the out-of-body experience into the other worlds. Joseph dreamed a dream about God, the son of Jacob, and he told his brothers, and they hated him even more because they didn't have special dreams like he did. And as you know, they sold him into slavery, and many years he forgave them all. In the New Testament, the Lord appeared to Joseph, the father of Jesus, in a dream saying, "Joseph, fear not, to take unto Mary thy wife, for that which is conceived in her is of the Holy Ghost. Here was Joseph, and he was about to marry a woman who was pregnant. And the Holy Spirit said, don't worry about it, it's one of the miracles of God. So Joseph had a transformative experience that enabled him to protect Mary and to raise their son Jesus. Now, St. Peter, who was one of the founders of the institutionalized Christian church, again, tried a life of asceticism, giving up pleasure, giving up food. But God came to him in a dream and said, do not call food unclean that God has cleansed. And so this dream virtually ended the pre-Christian food taboos. So this was a transformative experience, because remember what happened to the Buddha. He gained enlightenment after he started to eat nourishing foods again and take care of his nutrition. Same thing happened to St. Peter. Some TTEs changed Christian history. St. Paul was a Roman soldier who was actually a Jew, but employee of the Romans, and he went around killing Christians and trying to stamp out this new cult. But on the road to Damascus, he had a vision of Jesus, and Jesus said, my son, why are you persecuting me? And this immediately turned him into a Christian activist. And so, St. Paul started to spread of Christianity around the Mediterranean world, wrote many letters which now are a part of the Christian New Testament. So this was a very important TTE. Well, the Roman Empire didn't really like the Christians too much and didn't like the growth of Christianity, but in the year 314 Christian era, Emperor Constantine, while waging one of his battles, reported a vision of a cross superimposed on a sun, warning the message, in this sign conquer. He told his soldiers, we're all going to become Christians because Jesus Christ and God have told me we're going to conquer in his sign. But there's something strange about this TTE, because Constantine waited until 337 before he formally converted to Christianity. And by that time he was on his deathbed. So historians have speculated, did he actually have a TTE, or did he make up this story to inspire his troops? The cross was not a symbol of Christianity at that time. What was the symbol? It was the fish, because the word for fish was the same as the word for Christ. So, even though the cross is not cited in the Bible as the icon of Christianity, it became the icon of Christianity because of Constantine's alleged TTE. We take many of these stories for granted. Some of them are historically accurate, some we'd have to use a little bit of skepticism about. Now, some TTEs trigger a new religion. Mohammed's night journey was a TTE that had a world-changing impact. Around the year 621, Common Era, Mohammed was resting in Mecca when the Archangel Gabriel brought him a winged steed that carried him to the furthest mosque in Jerusalem, where he led the other prophets of the Abrahamic descent, in other words, the Jewish and Christian prophets, in prayer. From there he toured the circles of heaven, speaking with Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, and then was taken by Gabriel to Allah himself. This journey is described in chapter 17 of the Quran. The words of Allah were dictated to Muhammad by Gabriel between 610 and 632. Now, most people don't know this, but Muhammad was illiterate. He didn't know how to read, he didn't know how to write. So he would speak these verses, and his followers copied them down and later put them together. In addition to the night journey, each of those encounters with Gabriel could be considered a TTE. Now, many people say that Muhammad had all of this come to him in dreams. Don't tell this to a devout Muslim or you will get into trouble, that this is a dream. No. The Muslims believed that Muhammad was so highly evolved that there was no dividing line between his conscious and his unconscious. So his night journeys are seen as actual visitations to heaven, where the Quran was dictated. And then he recited the text to his scribe. And again, he remembered word for word, according to Islamic doctrine. But there is a TTE associated with the dream that one of his followers had. Abdullah bin Zayd was eager to introduce a recognizable call to prayer for the faithful, just as the Jews were called to the synagogue with a trumpet, and the early Christians by the sound of a rattle. During prayers, bin Zayd fell asleep and dreamed of a man dressed in green who was carrying a rattle. Then Zayd asked if he could buy the rattle to use as a call to prayer. The man in green replied, "No, don't use a rattle. The Christians already have the rattle. Call out, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet." Upon awakening, bin Zayd told Muhammad of his dream, and the prophet instructed him to teach the exact phrase that he had heard to another follower who became the first Muslim and gave the chant from the mosque several times a day, calling the faithful to prayer. In other words, you can see how these transpersonal experiences have been so central to the foundings of major religions. Now, some TTEs have political implications. The girl who was to become known as Joan of Arc began hearing voices at the age of 13 in the year 1425. English and Burgundian forces had burned down the town of Domremy, possibly focusing Joan's mind on the war. These voices were accompanied by white light, and Joan later identified them as St. Michael, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret. The latter two saints had died as martyrs, and of course Joan would also die in 1431, burned at the stake, a horrible form of death. But by that time she had motivated the French ruler to take his crown, which he had been delaying to do, and eventually England left France, and France became a unified, powerful nation. Next. Now, the establishment of the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, was presaged by dream revelations purportedly received by Joseph Smith in 1820. Joseph Smith dreamed that God told him to establish a new church, and in 1923, the angel Moroni appeared in a dream and supposedly revealed to him the existence of the Book of Mormon. Now, the Book of Mormon was on several golden tablets. The problem is, nobody ever drew them. Of course, they didn't photograph them. This is before the days of photography. But a few of his oh yes, we saw those golden tablets. They actually existed. Well, who knows? Nevertheless, this experience led to the founding of the Mormon Church. Now, some people are able to experience TTEs deliberately. And here is a very interesting American mystic, Andrew Jackson Davis. He spent only 5 months in a small New York school. He had read only a handful of books, but he had a TTE in what he called a higher sphere that triggered a career that involved intuitive diagnosis of disease, prescriptive measures for treating disease, predictions of local and national events, and completion of many, many books: astronomy, biology, education, government, medicine, philosophy, physics. One of these books, The Principles of Nature, 700 pages, widely read. Another was about Egypt in the ancient days, which his contemporary specialists felt was quite accurate. During the war between the states, he held seances in Washington, D.C. President Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, loved to go to seances. She loved to talk with spirits. And the speculation is that she brought President Lincoln to some of those seances. And at one of them, so the story goes, he decided to free the slaves and issue an emancipation freeing the slaves. We doubt this a little bit because freeing the slaves is actually a political act. President Lincoln had been in favor of slavery before the Civil War, the war between the states. However, to unify the nation around a cause, he decided to free the slaves, and this had its effect. More people then joined the army. They volunteered. They had something to fight for besides the unification of the United States. Nevertheless, Davis was the best-known clairvoyant of his time and was able to enter the higher sphere at will. Had he been born 5,000 years earlier, he would have become a shaman. Now here's another African American. This is Madam C.J. Walker, the first American female billionaire. She was suffering from a scalp infection that caused her to lose most of her hair. In the 1890s, she began experimenting with patented medicines and commercial hair care products. Nothing worked. Then she had a dream, and in the dream, a big black man appeared to me, she said, and told me what to mix up in my hair. Some of the remedy was grown in Africa, but I sent for it. I mixed it. I put it on my scalp, and in a few weeks, my hair was coming in faster than it ever fallen out. I tried it on my friend, it helped them. I made up my mind and began to sell it. Walker was quite impressive. An early African-American entrepreneur, philanthropist. She gave away most of her money. And social activist. She came from the cotton fields of the southern United States and became head of an international multi-million-dollar corporation because of her nighttime TTE. Now, some TTEs are spiritual awakenings. Susan Champion de Crispigny was a member of a distinguished military family and married into nobility. She became a key organizer of spiritualistic organizations in Great Britain during the 1920s and 1930s. Before that, she was an accomplished novelist, poet, and advocate for women's right to vote. In 1922, she wrote The Mind of a Woman, in which she presented the lives of great women throughout history. Her views on Christianity were very unorthodox for her conservative family background, and they kept her away from investigated mediumship and the spiritualists. But eventually, she broke loose of their command, attended a theosophical meeting, and began reading related literature. As soon as she began reading theosophy, she had a TTE, and she became a leader in several spiritualistic groups. All of this is told in her autobiography, This World and Beyond. One of the points that I'm making, as you can see, is that TTEs are not only held by men throughout the ages, plenty of women have TTEs that transform history. And I have used several examples. Also, TTEs are not limited to members of one ethnic group. I've cited people from various ethnic backgrounds who have TTEs. Now, this is a family TTE that involved more than one person. A major instrument of modern neuroscience, the electroencephalograph, or EEG, was invented by the German scientist Hans Berger in 1924 in an attempt to detect and measure weak electrical emanations of the human brain that he thought might be the carriers of telepathic communication. How did this noted inventor become interested in telepathy? Well, when he was 19, he fell with his horse down a steep ravine in Germany into the path of a mounted battery of guns pulled by 6 horses. He barely escaped with his life. That evening, Berger received a telegram from his father inquiring as to his well-being, the only time his father had ever made such an inquiry. So Berger thought, well, my father must have communicated with me mind to mind by telepathy. But no, it was actually Berger's sister who told her parents that her brother had suffered a serious accident. She had a vision of the accident and a strong emotional feeling. And so the sister told the father contacted Berger, and the vision was confirmed. And so a TTE led to the invention of the electroencephalograph machine. Now, one of the most remarkable series of TTEs in the field of mathematics was held by Srinivasa Ramanujan, a mathematical genius. He made substantial contributions to the analytical theory of numbers, elliptical functions, continued fractions, and infinite series. For the translator, those are all mathematical terms. Do your best with them. In 1914, he was invited to Cambridge University, where he worked for 5 years. There's another mathematical term. He proved 3,000 theorems in his short lifetime. Now, where did he get all of these ideas? From his dreams. And the inspiration for his work came to him when the Hindu goddess Namakal appeared to him in his dreams. She would present mathematical formulae that he could verify upon awakening. But Namakal did not appear in every dream. For example, Ramanujan once recalled there was a red screen formed by flowing blood. Suddenly a hand began to write a number of results in elliptical intervals. And as soon as I woke up, I committed them to writing. So here we have an example of a very famous mathematician. And instead of using logic and reason and ordinary consciousness, he had his great discoveries appear to him at night, mainly through a Hindu goddess, Namakal. Now, Namakal is not a very important Hindu goddess. Very few people pray to her, and she doesn't have any big temples. So she had some time to do other things, like helping out this mathematical genius. Now, Gopi Krishna is an example of TTEs that don't always turn out well the first time. I actually had the opportunity to visit Gopi Krishna in his home in Kashmir twice while he was alive. In 1935, at the age of 34, during his morning meditation, Gopi Krishna experienced a stream of liquid light entering my brain through the spinal cord with a roar like that of a waterfall. This experience left him in a state of exaltation and happiness impossible to describe. But there were side effects. This experience left him with insomnia, depression, and thoughts of suicide. It took him 10 years to integrate that TTE into his daily life. Eventually, he established a small institute in Kashmir, which he used as a base of operations for his writings and lectures that took him all over the world. It was Gopi Krishna's conviction that genius and enlightenment were due to Kundalini awakening. And he believed that the Kundalini serpent went from the base of his spine up to the top of his head, and this is what led to his awakening. But there was a short circuit someplace along the way with the electrical system. The Kundalini, as I said, left him depressed for 10 years. And so he recommended that people seek guidance, they go about this slowly, and also some people have this type of enlightenment completely unaware because it is such a slow developmental process. And this is what he wrote about in many, many provocative books. Well, Here's an important ecological TTE. Born in Berlin in 1933, George Shaler and his family emigrated to the United States. In 1947, where he attended college at the University of Alaska, on a break between semesters, he joined Olaus Murie, America's most prominent field biologist, for a field trip to northern Alaska's Shenjak River Valley. It was there that Shaler had his TTE, what he later called his moment of enlightenment. However, it lasted more than a moment. He and Murie's group cataloged dozens of species of wildlife, and he decided that the whole point of biology of conservation is that you have a moral obligation to protect that you study. He has positively influenced the fate of a greater number of species than anybody else, including better-known figures like Diana Fossey and Jane Goodall, both of whom were inspired by him. He has written several books and has won numerous awards, including the World of Wildlife Fund Gold Medal, the highest award you can get in the field of ecology. So, you have seen that TTEs are influential in religion, in politics, in invention, in ecology, in philosophy, in virtually all major fields of human endeavor, including mathematics. Now, here is an example of a community TTE. You all know this in Russia better than I do. Sometimes a small group of people can have a TTE that triggers historical events. In pre-communist Russia, there was an ancient pagan tradition in which Mother Earth was given love and respect. In addition, there were groups of wizards who used herbs and earth energies for healing, and much later, the Eastern Orthodox Hesychasm practices that emphasized inner science. But in 1917, the Russian government, actually the Soviet government, espoused dialectical materialism and atheism. Such spiritual-oriented groups, ranging from Siberian shamans to the old believers, were persecuted while others went underground. One of these groups was founded by Porfiry Ivanov, who had a TTE and developed breathing exercises, cold water bathing, and exercises in attaining Christ consciousness. His school continues today, especially in Siberia. Now, with the demise of the Soviet Union, this school and others operated openly, but in the meantime, they have kept Russia's transpersonal traditions alive. The same thing can be said of shamanism. I visited Siberian shamans, and once they were permitted to use their drums again, they dug them up. They'd been in hiding. They'd been buried for decades. And it was a great joy that the shamans, or the shamans' children, were now able to use their drums again for their own TTEs. Sometimes a spiritual emergency can lead to a TTE. And this, of course, is the term of Stan and Christina Graf. Ulrich Tolly, born in Germany, spent his teenage years as his father in Spain and went to London to study philosophy. At the age of 29, deeply depressed, he recalled, "If I cannot live with myself, there must be two of me, the I and the self. The I cannot live with. Maybe only one of them is real." After this epiphany, he changed his first name in Eckhart in honor of the 13th century Dominican priest, Meister Eckhart, and he was tried for heresy by the Roman Catholic Church, and he died in prison. Very sad story. But his writings survived and influenced people like Tolly. Tolly himself wrote best-selling books like The Power of Now and A New Earth. Some religious conservatives have called him the Antichrist for such statements as, "Was Jesus the Son of God? Yes, but so are you. You just haven't realized it yet." Now, this was heresy to the Roman Catholic Church, too much like Buddhism and Hinduism. But Tolly's work has inspired millions of people. Now, TTEs are not always benevolent. When Sister Teresa, the future Nobel Prize winner, was traveling to Darjeeling in 1946, she heard God tell her that her life's work was to recognize the divinity in the poorest of the poor, to serve them with love. In 1996, 50 years later, an Israeli student also heard God give him orders to kill Yitzhak Rabin, another Nobel laureate. All right, which is the real God? The one who inspired Mother Teresa, or the one that inspired the assassin of Yitzhak Rabin? See, these are questions and problems for transpersonal psychology to investigate thoroughly. There are devout people who would reject the divine origins of one or another of these commands, and there are skeptics who would belittle them both. Nevertheless, both incidents can be categorized as TTEs that changed history for better or for worse. And the terrorists today who are blowing themselves up, many of them claim they have had TTEs, and they have heard the voice of God telling them to kill the infidel. So TTEs are very important, even if they are negative, even if they are destructive. And as I say, transpersonal psychology needs to make these investigations following some of the pioneering work of David Lukoff and his colleagues along these lines. Now, TTEs can be shared experiences. Captain Chelsea Sully Sullenberger took his first solo flight when he was 16. It lasted 3 minutes. In 2008, he took another 3-minute flight when, as the co-pilot of U.S. Airways Flight 1549, a flock of birds struck his airplane shortly after takeoff from New York City's LaGuardia Airport. Within seconds, he had to decide whether to return to LaGuardia or attempt to land in the nearby New Jersey airport, or to land on the Hudson River. He had never flown with his co-pilot before, yet they worked together instinctively to land on the river and save all of his passengers. Now, I have met Sullenberger, I have heard him speak in San Francisco, and he told us how he and Skiles were both seamlessly joined in their hearts and mind, both during and after the emergency landing. So, here you have the panorama of TTEs and how they have changed history. Thank you. We have maybe time for 2 or 3 questions.
Okay, so there's a little time for questions. I also want to mention that Stanley KRIPPNER has a website, www.stanleykrippner, all one word, .com, where he has many of his articles up online for free to download. So it's quite a wonderful resource. So, is there somebody with a mic? Or if not, we can use this mic. Anybody have a question they would like to ask?
Yes, my question is about TTE and how you define it in terms of actual behaviors that can be heroic or transformative in some sense. But the question really is, are we not diluting this whole notion of transformation if we are to not look at the inner consciousness when we just look at an outer appearance or an outer behavior? So by this definition, anything can be considered a TTE if it is somewhat heroic in nature. So that's the question.
First of all, I never used those words. The definition of TTE rests upon it being a transpersonal experience. Now, not all transpersonal experiences are transpersonal transformative experiences in the outside world. Some of them are transformative in the inside world, and I'm glad you brought that to our attention. The theme of my talk was experiences that do have consequences in the outer world. But, of course, you are correct. Transformation is an important part of any definition of transpersonal psychology. So, people can have transformational experiences that change them inwardly and do not have much of an effect on the outer world, especially a historical effect like the cases I gave you today.
My question is, does the transformational experiences are associated with places or objects?
You know, this is an extremely important question. Are these experiences associated with places or objects? Personally, I think they can be. There are areas of the world that are geographical anomalies, oddities, and I have visited some of them. For example, there are areas in Wales, which is a part of Great Britain, where people regularly go to have visions or to have dreams that are spiritual in nature. And scientists have come in with equipment to measure the geomagnetic fields, the electrostatic fields, the magnetic anomalies. Yes, these areas are different than other areas. Areas where people do not go to have these experiences. Also, you talk about objects. Sometimes people will hold a special type of object, this is common in shamanism, and holding that feather or that rattle or that carving can help in sending them off on their visionary experience. You know, again, this is a topic that transpersonal psychology needs to investigate. Transpersonal psychology has its work cut out for them, as we say in English. And this is an excellent research study. And now I think we have time for only one more question.
Just information. In my case, all the experiences are associated with the number 6 throughout my life.
Well, some people believe that there are special numbers that are associated with TTEs. So again, there's a whole range of outside cues that are possible. And sometimes people have these experiences like St. Paul, who didn't even expect them. So you can say that the experience was sent by God herself. Yes, that could be an outside influence. So there can be a whole range of outside influences, as well as internal alchemy, internal percolations and transformations that are resulting in these experiences. So, we are ending exactly on time. Thank you all for coming, and I enjoyed the questions as well. I tried so hard to go so.
I know. Sometimes just when there's a name, a date,
Of course, that takes
habitually the person pronounces because it's known for you. It goes like this.
You're right.
And we just drop it. Sorry, but
If you translate for me again,
what we did that.
okay? You will have transformed.
Because there's so much interesting things. Anyway, we just.
Oh, I have just drawn. I wish there was some way you could have sent me a message.
We just did our best.
Teacher in India.